Hello, I am Professor Zaldivar, and today we'll be talking about Blaise Pascal. More specifically, we'll be talking about one of the most famous propositions in the history of philosophy, Pascal's wager. This proposition was offered as a response to ongoing concerns and the limitations therein in proving the existence of God. Pascal, as we will see, takes a very different approach from such famous philosophers as Saint Anselm and Saint Thomas Aquinas. But before we move on to the argument, such as it is, I want to share something a little bit more poetic with you. Pascal wrote, "If the whole universe were to crush him, man would still be more noble than that which killed him, because he knows that he dies, and the advantage that the universe has over him. The universe knows nothing of this." Now, I think this quotation, besides being very pretty, also shares with us or reminds us of what the intrinsic and inherent nature of humanity is. We are fundamentally thoughtful things. What sets us apart from the rest of the universe, potentially from the rest of the entire universe, is our ability to consider the world around us. It's our ability to add meaning to facts. And if we don't embody that in a mindful way, we are, in a very real sense, being less than human. Having said that, let's take a look at the argument, or the beginning of Pascal's wager. Pascal starts us thinking on his proposition by noting that we cannot know God. We have not the slightest hope of understanding God. And we have not the slightest hope of understanding God because we have nothing in common with Him. He is entirely different from us in every way that two things can be different, and without any commonality, without anything like Him, we cannot know Him. Of course, we can have lots of beliefs about God, we can have many opinions, but justified, certain knowledge is something that eludes us. Because we cannot know anything about God, there is also no proof that can be offered for God's existence. Of course, you have to, as St. Anselm pointed out, you have to understand something in order to be able to speak meaningfully of it. And since we cannot understand God, we cannot speak meaningfully of it, and therefore we cannot prove whether or not God exists. Now, one way to respond to this observation is to say, well, therefore, the most rational course of action is to neither believe nor disbelieve in the existence of God. The point here is, if someone asks you to consider whether a thing exists, and you do not understand it, the thing that he's asking you to consider, and you have no proof for its existence or otherwise, then the most rational choice is to say, well, I don't know whether it exists or not. This is, of course, the agnostic position. Pascal counters this by saying, in the case of God, unlike and many other agnostic positions we can take, in the case of God, if you do not choose to believe or do not choose to disbelieve, the not choosing is essentially the same as disbelieving. After all, believing in God requires active participation in a faith, and anything other than active participation in a faith basically counts or collapses into the same position, i.e., the non-believer position. So if we have two possibilities, right? You either believe in God or you don't believe in God. Those are two epistemic possibilities. And you have two metaphysical possibilities. God exists or God doesn't exist. And as we see on the screen, we can combine these possibilities into a very simple matrix, right? If you do believe in God and God exists, then the reward is very great, right? You gain an infinitely good reward. If you're a Christian, this is heaven. If you believe in God and He does not exist, then, well, you have your life, you lead your life, and at the end of your life, nothing happens. If you don't believe in God and God exists, then of course the consequences are really horrible for you. And again, if you're Christian, that would mean hell. If you don't believe in God and God does not exist, well, you live your life and then you die and basically nothing. So because all of the reward can be found only in the part of the matrix in which you believe in God, Pascal suggests that the only rational thing to do is believe in God. In short, believing in God either gets you infinite reward or no negative consequences whatsoever. Disbelieving in God either gets you no negative consequences in the best case scenario or gets you infinite punishment. In other words, the best case scenario for the atheist and agnostic is no better than the worst case scenario for the theist. Of course, that suggests that the rational thing to do is to believe in God. There are some objections to this. One objection is to say, well, but there are many religions, right? There's lots and lots and lots of different flavors of Christianity, and then there's Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism and various Aboriginal religions and shamanistic religions and Shintoism, etc., etc., etc. And there are so many religions that the likelihood of you finding the right one, the right religion that gets you that infinite reward, is really low. But here's Pascal's response. He says, look, even if it is true that the odds of you getting the right, picking the right religion are really low, you have to pay to play, essentially, right? If you don't make any choice, then you have zero chance of getting the right religion. So if you make a choice, you might only have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting the right religion, but that's still better than a 0 chance. So it is still true that even if the chance that God exists is barely positive, even if the chance that you make the right choice is barely positive, it is still better to make a choice, since that's the only way in which you can win the reward, right, of a great afterlife. Now, notice a second argument is, well, there's a stunning lack of evidence supporting religious belief in general, or supporting any particular religious belief. And Pascal responds, look, it cannot be argued against a wager that there's a lack of evidence for religion because, well, we do things all the time that are not supported by evidence, right? When you apply for a job, there's very little solid evidence that they're looking for someone just like you. When you cook something new, there's very little evidence that it's going to taste good. When you try to make a new friendship and you walk up to a stranger and you say hello, there's very little evidence that it's going to become a good friendship. We do things all the time based on the smallest shreds of evidence. Basically, we act on faith all the time. And so why wouldn't we do so in this case also? Finally, a very good objection, another probably the best objection of the three, is the point that we can't simply choose to believe, right? We can say we ought to believe in God, we can see the rational argument for believing in God, but faith is not simply a matter of choice. It's not a switch that I can turn on. And this is right, and Pascal can't deny that. I think this is a good objection. But Pascal can say faith is a tricky thing, right? If you practice a faith, if you do the things that faithful people do, you will gradually come to think like them. This is how psychology works. If you immerse yourself in a particular mindset or in the activities of a particular mindset, you will eventually come to have that mindset. I can give you a very simple example. If you move to a city with a very strong loyalty to a particular sports team, so for example, if you move to Gainesville, which of course is very loyal to the University of Florida Gators, if you lived here long enough and you go to a few games and you talk to your neighbors, sooner or later you will find yourself being a fan of the Florida Gators. You may be a fan of other teams too, But just being in an atmosphere in which everyone is a fan of the Florida Gators has this kind of momentum, this impact on you that makes you a fan of the Florida Gators also. And Pascal's point is that faith can work in very much the same way. If you go to church, if you surround yourself with faithful people, eventually you are very, very likely to develop faith on your own. Finally, there's one more advantage besides sort of potentially winning this lottery of having picked the right faith and getting an eternal reward. Pascal notes that believing in God, and here we're talking about a Christian conception of God and therefore being a Christian. So believing in God in this way will make you honest, grateful, humble, generous, sincere, etc. So it may be that even if the chance that God exists is zero, choosing to believe in God is still better for you in terms of quality of life and in terms of quality of community. And a little earlier I just said that Pascal is coming at this from a particularly Christian perspective, but notice that a lot of those virtues I just mentioned, honesty, humility, generosity, sincerity, are virtues in just about every religion on the face of this planet, and so it doesn't have to be a purely Christian argument. In other words, regardless of the metaphysical benefits to having faith, there are worldly benefits to being faithful, and we ought not to overcome that. And that is essentially the argument that Pascal puts forward. That is essentially Pascal's wager. The conclusion, of course, is that for both metaphysical and sociological reasons, it is better to believe in God than to be either an atheist or agnostic. Thank you very much for listening to this introductory lecture. Again, I am Professor Zaldivar.